Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. Decades of climate misinformation from the press, government, academia, social media, and the public schools has paid off. When people hear stories about glaciers now, their conditioned response is quite predictable. CNN reported this today. Researchers have recovered a treasure trove of World War I artifacts from a cave shelter in northern Italy revealed by the melting of a glacier. And Sandy M. responded. She said, "Fascinating but sad at many levels." Apparently she was triggered by these four words, melting of a glacier. She's been conditioned to believe that glaciers melting is a bad thing and is caused by global warming. But let's take a step back from the propaganda and the conditioning and think about what this story is actually telling us. The cave had to have been ice-free during World War I when it was being used. At some point after World War I, the glacier expanded into the cave, and now it's starting to retreat again. This means that the glacier is larger now than it was 100 years ago. In the November 1976 issue of National Geographic, they documented glacial retreat during the first half of the 20th century. Here's a picture of an Austrian glacier in 1903, 1929, 1940, and 1956. You can see that the glacier retreated very rapidly during the first half of the century. And it was the same story on the other side of the Atlantic. In 1923, Glacier National Park was melting so rapidly that experts predicted it would be ice-free by 1948. This temperature graph was from the November 1976 issue of National Geographic. It shows that Earth was very warm from about 1910 through 1960, and then it got cold during the 1970s. The United States temperature record shows this very clearly. The percent of days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit was much higher in the United States prior to 1960 than it has been since. Summers were very warm in the United States from 1910 to 1960, but they've been much cooler over the past 60 years. What I'm showing you here is the raw, untampered temperature data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Let's take one more look at the November 1976 issue of National Geographic. They gave a very good explanation of how the sun drives the Earth's climate. But that was back when National Geographic was a legitimate publication. Now they claim that a 1 part per 10,000 increase in an essential trace gas over the past century is the driver of climate. In 1979, the Age newspaper from Melbourne said, "Preparing the world for a new ice age." This article has a lot of interesting information in it, but for this video I just want to discuss one paragraph. Let's read through that paragraph. Drought, floods, the failure of monsoons, and the run of hard winters are all evidence, they say, that the world has come to the end of a spell of even-tempered weather which began in about 1910 and lasted until about 1960. This period has even been called a little tropical age by climatologist Reed Bryson. The period from 1910 to 1960 was very warm, and there wasn't any disagreement in the scientific community about it at that time. But government agencies like NASA and NOAA have rewritten history and erased the warmth of the past. This is the current global temperature graph from NASA. We know from the CNN report that the Italian cave was ice-free during World War I. And we also know from the CNN report that there's lots of ice in the cave now. So according to NASA, the cave was ice-free during the coldest years on record, and now it has lots of ice in it during the hottest years on record. And according to the NASA temperature graph, the little tropical age was also during the coldest years on record. Glacier National Park was melting so fast in 1923 that experts predicted it would be ice-free by 1948. In the context of this NASA temperature graph, that makes absolutely no sense. Ice doesn't lie, but climate scientists do. Published government temperature graphs are propaganda. They're not science, as I'm about to show you. The United States has by far the highest quality temperature data in the world. This is what the measured U.S. temperature data looks like over the past century. Afternoon temperatures reached their peak in 1934 and were second warmest during 1921, 100 years ago, and there's been a downward trend ever since. But the graphs which the government releases to the public don't look anything like the actual measured data. They tamper with it and produce graphs which look like this. After government agencies tamper with the data, the cooling trend turns into a strong warming trend. This trend doesn't actually exist. It's propaganda and fraud from government agencies. The warm period from 1910 to 1960, which was reported by National Geographic in 1976, was very real. They showed the year 1921, 100 years ago, as being a very hot year. And on October 3rd, 1921, the New York Times reported a worldwide heat wave of unusual length and intensity. The New York Times said 100 years ago that Earth had a fever. And the New York Herald reported in 1922, death for millions in 1921's record heat wave. The record heat of 1921 was associated with a massive drought, and millions of people faced starvation in Europe, Russia, and Asia. But NASA has completely erased the record heat of 100 years ago. Government temperature graphs have nothing to do with reality, but they are very effective propaganda. And we can see how well the propaganda has worked with people like Sandy M. She thinks that more ice now than there was during World War I is a sign that the climate is burning up. For the past 13 years, Toto has been working very hard to deprogram people from this government and press brainwashing. You can visit Toto and Kyrie on the web at realclimatescience.com.